Welcome to our EAS webinar on medical device quality auditing, presented by EAS independent consultant George Gary Califactor. We appreciate you joining our presentation, where we are excited to share regulatory information on medical device quality auditing, and I will turn the presentation over to George.
Thank you very much, Amy. This is George Califactor. I am an independent consultant for EAS. Basically, I worked for the FDA for over 21 years as an international medical device investigator. Then afterwards, for the past 10 years, as an independent consultant, primarily in medical device regulatory compliance and quality assurance. I would like to talk about medical device quality auditing. Basically, here's a little bio about myself that I just covered. We're going to talk about auditing, what auditing is, the quality system, look at some quality system basics, audit basics, type of audits, audit readiness, FDA and international audits, scope and purpose, similarities and differences, and enforcement, FDA audits, how you behave before, during, and after, and recent trends in FDA medical device enforcement. So basically, here's some questions that you have to think about. Quality system audit, the types of audits, differences and similarities between FDA and EU, and trends, FDA. So I'm going to first talk about just very generically about quality systems. So again, they're good and bad products and services. If you have a good product and good service, that means you have wonderful quality, less problems to fix, and more money because you don't have to spend money and resources, people, and consultants like myself to come in and help you fix them. Versus if you do have bad products and services, you're going to have bad quality, you're going to have problems, maybe even lawsuits or visits or more visits from the FDA and notified bodies and elsewhere. Less profit because you have to then spend a lot of time and money and resources to get these things fixed. So basically, when you think about products and services, you also have to have the customer in mind. So again, what a quality system is, it's basically the internal goals, policies, with instructions, training, documentation, external and internal requirements, supplier and customer expectations, promise, and continuous improvement. So I'm just mentioning a couple terms here: quality control, GMPs, quality assurance, quality systems, regulatory compliance. I'm going to cover those very briefly. Quality is perception, degree to which product or service meets customer expectations. Quality control is detection of defects. Quality assurance is the perfection of defects. Regulatory compliance is here applicable internal policies, goals, objectives, and external industry and governmental laws, regulations, standards, directives, and guidance. Good manufacturing practices is a set of external principles and procedures which, when followed by manufacturers of goods and services, will help ensure that the products and services will have the required quality. Regulatory compliance, as I explained, is basically where company officials follow external governmental and industry laws, directives, regulations, and standards. They could be basically anything. Health regulations, which those are the ones that we're going to be interested in. Safety regulations, hiring practices, accounting and tax reporting, environmental regulations, that's some examples, and there's many, many more. Basically, with that, you're going to have internal audits and checks and tests to make sure that you're being compliant with those applicable laws, regulations, directives, standards, guidance, whatever. So this is a typical organization for regulatory and quality. This may be very similar to what your company has, or may be different. Not worrying too much about the titles per se, but actually the roles. So usually it's split into two parts. You have regulatory and clinical affairs, and then regulatory compliance and quality assurance. So I'm just going to very briefly cover those roles. Regulatory affairs, basically the folks that determine, well, is this a medical device, a biologic, a drug, etc.? Then if so, do you then need to submit paperwork to the FDA to get that product approved or cleared? So for medical devices, you have two pathways. It's either one, that the product is grandfathered as safe and effective, therefore it's a 510K clearance, or it's a product that is not yet grandfathered is approved to be safe and effective, then you have to submit a PMA, pre-market approval, not a PMN, pre-market notification, to the FDA. 510K or pre-market notification, PMN, are the same thing. PMA is a little different. And then on the side for the EU, it's called a technical file or design dossier. So you basically supply those paperwork either to the FDA or to a notified body, EU in this case, or other government bodies like Health Canada or whoever. So then you also work with clinical affairs. Those are basically the folks that are running these studies. So for medical devices, there's basically three types of classifications. There's class 1, 2, and 3. Class 3 medical device products, which some need a 510K, but the majority need a PMA. Need to do some type of clinical testing to prove they're safe and effective, or have clinical evaluations. So the clinical affairs folks are the ones that take care of these animal and human studies. The regulatory affairs folks also work with different type of design team members if designing for the product is required. All Class 2 and all Class 3 medical device products require design controls, where certain Class 1 products require design controls for FDA. It's slightly different when it comes to the EU and other international medical device regulations. With classification, basically Class 1 medical device product, if you design and or manufacture it incorrectly, the risk of somebody dying or getting seriously injured is very, very low. With a Class 3 product, if you don't design or manufacture it properly, the probability of somebody dying and or getting very seriously injured is very, very high. The Class 2 product is somewhere in between. So an example of a Class 1 medical device product is like a crutch or a splint. Example of a Class 3 medical device product is like a pacemaker. Example of a Class 2 medical device product is like a implant. So as you can see from the different type of classifications, that's where it basically starts, and that's what regulatory affairs folks need to do. They need to figure out what type of product it is, if it's a medical device or drug or biologic or combination product, etc. And then if it is a medical device product, you then need to then submit paperwork to the FDA. If so, 510K or PMA. If not, then go through the basic quality requirements. Why I'm touching base on these different type of roles is because whenever folks actually audit, they look at different type of quality and regulatory areas. So for medical devices, not only you have to be considered with the quality laws and requirements, such as, say, with FDA, which is 21 CFR 820, which is the QSR, 803, which is the special complaint MDR, medical device reporting. 806, which is corrections and removals. And 821, which is tracking. You also have to look at the regulatory side. So those are various areas such as 21 CFR 807, which is registration and listing in 510Ks, and 812 and 814 that deal with PMAs and investigation device exemptions. So those different areas are ones typically that regulatory affairs, clinical affairs look at. Clinical affairs, like I stated, they're the ones that deal with the animal and clinical studies. So this is their rules. Regulatory compliance are basically people like myself who don't necessarily do a lot of this work, but make sure that it's being done by the various folks, manufacturing, quality, regulatory, etc. So we're basically either mentors, guides, coaches, giving training in a lot of areas, or sometimes we're the quality and regulatory police, where we're actually having to make the decision, the buck stops here, so they basically don't have a bad product go out the door. And we do other type of areas in regulatory compliance too, like maintaining the CAPA system, complaints, non-conformances, documentation change control, doing internal audits, those type of activities. Quality assurance works directly with regulatory compliance in that they're looking at the internal type of activities, whereas the regulatory compliance folks are looking at internal and making sure that they jive with the external, like the FDA laws and regulations. Some of those I mentioned, like 820, 803, etc. So quality assurance basically sees, well, are the various folks in the company adhering to the various type of internal procedures, whereas the regulatory compliance folks are doing the same thing, but also making sure that those internal procedures and practices jive with the industry and governmental regulatory procedures and practices. Quality control are basically the folks that test medical device products. So you have three different types here. You have a received good, which is traditionally raw materials and components. Then you have an in-process product, which is a sub-assembly, and basically products that aren't yet finished to make a finished good. And then you have finished devices. So in some cases, some of these can be manufactured, say, at the company. Some of these that you can have them manufactured or serviced outside. An example of that is that you manufacture a product that goes out the door to be maybe polished or cleaned or sterilized by a contract facility, then comes back in and you complete the manufacturing process until it is a finished product, labeled and packaged, and maybe even sterilized. So those are the different type of activities that go through manufacturing. So quality control basically inspects and tests all those different type of products and sees if they pass or fail. They also work with quality assurance and regulatory compliance to make sure that the test equipment is calibrated and it works properly. You have different type of engineers. That's the next role. You have quality engineers, design development engineers, and manufacturing engineers. And these specialized people, they do different type of functions. So the quality engineer basically handles things like process validations, comes up with some type of different specifications, etc. The design development engineer is usually the head of the design team that works with all the other design team members, which includes the quality engineer, manufacturing engineer, to make sure the product is designed properly. And the manufacturing engineer works with the other two, the quality engineer and the design development engineer, to make sure that you have proper manufacturing processes that have been validated and controlled, and that type of thing. So they come up with device master records, which are basically the blueprints how to make and design and test a product. And that basically goes to the production and quality control folks. Those are the people that actually use these papers to make and design and test these products. They also work with other folks like clinical affairs and others do post-market assessment type of activities, which is a quality assurance and regulatory compliance type of activity too. So as you can see, all these different type of roles for these different folks, quality and regulatory, etc., are very important. And why you need to know that is because you'll be actually confronted in meeting these various folks when you go ahead and do your audit. So with that, just wanted to talk just very briefly about a quality system. With a quality system, basically you have three parts. You have quality control, which is again a check. You have the GMPs, which are again the requirements, the conform or not conform to your procedures. And you have basically quality assurance, which looks over and comes up with different type of plan, do, check, and action type of activities with continuous improvement. What that really means is that you have procedures. These procedures have to jive with the internal and external requirements. Then you go ahead and implement those procedures. Then you follow those procedures and you justify that through some type of paperwork. And if that's fine, great. If not, then you have to correct those through training, through corrections, corrective actions, preventive actions. And one of the ways to see if you're doing that properly is to do an audit. So this is just an overview of quality audits. So I'm going to go into a little bit about that. But first, look at the quality system. Again, the quality system is a business management model. It's customer required. It's a legal obligation, i.e. by FDA, EU, Health Canada, etc. And it's top management's written instructions to employees how to conduct business. So again, it looks at not only the customer requirements, but also the internal requirements and the requirements of everybody. So when I talk about these, it's basically one that goes from the supplier all the way to the customer, with distributors and manufacturers and all these other folks in between. So again, why have a quality system? It complies with internal and external goals, objectives, and regulations, makes good business sense, cost advantage, competitive advantage, growth in product and sales and market. If you have a good product and service, therefore you'll have more business. And of course, a lot of these costs will be reduced because you don't have to have all these checks and balances, basically having a bad product or worry about lawsuits or corrections and that. The quality system will improve and continue on. So again, as I mentioned, you have to have these policies, you have to document those, you have to make sure everybody's doing it right, you have to have these checks in place, and one of those checks is basically the audits. So again, here's a little bit more information about quality system requirement. I have it here as a little figure. Again, what I do is have these in place. You have to figure out what is the right goal. That's the first key, is what is the goal you're going to achieve. Then after that, plan, implement, document, maintain, do. And again, those are the actual parts of the word establish. In medical device requirements for FDA, that is 21 CFR 820, every section uses the word establish. Again, establish means define, which is the procedures. Implement means top management has to then take these established procedures and make sure that the people, quality, regulatory, manufacturing, sales, marketing, whatever, have been trained against those procedures. And then those folks follow those procedures. And then they document by filling out master records to make sure, and that's the evidence and proof, that they actually have those implemented procedures being followed. So that's basically what a quality system is. Everybody takes responsibility, and then there's different type of monitorings that regulatory compliance and quality assurance folks usually conduct to make sure that everything's working well. And again, if there are hiccups, then go ahead and get those corrected. So when I talked about the goals, the key with that is basically looking at these systems in place. So the problem is that you may be picking the wrong type of goal. And the key there is basically making sure what goal you want, because there's an industry goal, there's a regulatory goal, and there's just an internal goal the top management wants. You have to make sure that they all jive together. Again, this little statement here talks about all those. So let's look at some examples here. So I just picked 3 different types: time, quality, and quantity. So if your goal is to sell more products quicker than the competition, it's basically time and quantity. And here are the advantages, and here are the disadvantages. If your goal is to sell quality products quicker than the competition, that means that time and quality is important. And here are the advantages, and here are the disadvantages. The other one is to sell many products, and then it's quality and quantity. Here are advantages, and here are disadvantages. So you see, from those 3, you're not getting all 3 of those, you're getting 2 of the 3. If we decide to have all 3, that means sell more quality products quicker than the competition. So you have time, quality, and quantity. Therefore, that's really what a quality system is. And there's advantages, and you have no disadvantages. So as you can see, by picking all 3, balancing quality, quantity, and time together, that's really what a quality system is. Don't have any disadvantages. So I mentioned earlier about establish, and the first part of establish is define, which means you're going to have quality system procedures. So there's typically 4 levels of those. You're going to have a quality manual, which is a basic top-level document that defines what the company is, what they're going to do. Then you have SOPs, which are standard operating procedures. They define the who, what, where, when, and why, not the how. The how is the work instructions in the blank master forms that show how we're going to do this. So, for example, the quality policy may state, we're going to have a quality system in place, which we're going to design product, we're going to manufacture the product, we're going to service and install the product. Very generically, It may even quote the different regulations, such as 820.30 for design controls and others. The SOPs go into that, so you can have a procedure about design controls, about quality auditing, about purchasing controls, complaints, etc. Then the work instructions are how you're going to do that. Well, when I'm going to do design controls, I'm basically going to have a matrix that I'm going to fill out that lists the intended uses and user needs, then the design inputs, design outputs, verification, validation type of activities, etc. And then, of course, the form, which is basically, let's say, a matrix that puts it all together. So that's an example there for design controls. And of course, the actual design history file is the actual evidence that you've done design controls per 820.30 as an example, which is included in your SOP and work instructions. So that's kind of how it all works together. Why I'm mentioning that is because that's the information that you can use when you do your audit. You're going to look at procedures. You're going to look at blank forms. You're going to look at completed records. So here's some examples here of those. So you're going to have just generic procedures, and you're going to have product and process specific procedures. So the generic ones are on the left, and the specific product and process ones are on the right. You're also, going to look at the quality manual, SOPs, instructions, and different type of records. The key to it all is making sure that you have continuous improvement. Again, the way to do that is to do audits. I also mentioned touch base on design controls. That's one part of the quality system. Here are all the other areas. The four key ones are management controls, design controls, the capital system, and production process controls, which again get involved into purchasing controls, material controls, installation, servicing, documentation, change controls, equipment controls, facility controls, acceptance controls, production process controls kind of oversees it all, and purchasing controls. And of course, you do have these different type of audit schemes, internal audits and external audits, and supplier audits. So I'm going to touch base a little bit what those three are. So again, it's basically management's buy-in of why you need a quality system. So if top management doesn't think it's important, remember back to the slide to talk about the goals, then nobody else will actually give a hoot as far as having a proper quality system. But again, if you're in a company that has problems like that, then you'll be forced to have a proper quality system. Why? Because you'll be audited, or in this case, inspected and investigated by the FDA, or audited by, say, a EU or Health Canada notified body, or someone like that, or maybe even an outside type of company that FDA and Health Canada and others choose and pick to come in and be like FDA or Health Canada, etc. So they will require you to follow these basic FDA or Health Canada or European rules. And if you don't, well, then they'll take some actions against you. So it could be as simple as giving you a ticket, which on the FDA side is a FDA 43, or if it's very bad product or area that you're doing, then you can seize product and join companies, that is U.S. companies. If you're a foreign company, then all they can do is say, sorry, the product doesn't come into the United States. Again, very similar type of rules for, say, Europe and South Canada or China or whatever else is. So again, all these different type of quality systems, not only in the U.S. but others, are basically all the same. Some little tweaks here and there as far as what the differences are, but basically they're the same. You have procedures, people are trained against the procedures, you have to follow the procedures, you have to document that's done, you have to have some type of check and balance, such as like with the CAPA system and internal audits and external audits to make sure it's working. You have some type of continuous improvement, like post-market surveillance or analyzing source CAPA data to make sure that you have improved on these procedures, and you may not or may do have to then revise medical device products or processes. So again, as I mentioned, auditing is one type. Audits are non-biased, planned, objective, and independent information, evaluation, investigation, and or verification of a person, organization, system, process, enterprise, project, or product against predetermined governmental, industrial, procedural, customer, and or other internal and external requirements, standards, laws, etc. So there are different types of audits. There's accounting, financial audits, business system audits, safety, environmental audits, lean manufacturing audits, and the one that we're looking at is quality audits. And there are, as I mentioned, different type of systems. There are also different type of audits. And again, we're going to look at the quality audit. So a quality audit is basically an assessment, subjective, to perform at defined intervals, sufficient frequency. Usually on the FDA side, these audits have to be done annually of a company's quality system to make sure that following and meeting, in this case, FDA requirements as an example. So what you're looking at is all the FDA laws and regulations. So it's the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act and 21 CFR 820, 803, 806, 801, etc. So it's all those different type of regulations you're looking at for that. You also may look at other things, say, for example, that decide your U.S. company decide to market your products, say, in Europe or in Canada or in China or Brazil, whatever, then you have to worry about those international laws and regulations too. So again, the folks who audit, they're basically either A, internal regulatory affairs or corporate assurance folks, and or they're outside folks like consultants like myself who come in and do these audits. Again, it's a snapshot in time. That's going to find everything, but FDA requires these to be done by law. Same thing for Health Canada and Europe and the other international type of laws and standards. So with this, basically what you're doing is you're looking and seeing, is the documentation and the quality data, these quality records, appropriate? Do they meet the internal goals and external laws and regulations? And do the people actually, are they following these, or are they doing what they're supposed to do, meaning with the established and maintained procedures? So it's looking to make sure that all these are done. You could have different type of audits. So either A, the company is or is not in a state of control, at least since the last audit. So again, it's a snapshot in time. Again, these audits are not FDA inspections. Inspection is something that's done by FDA. They're also not regular product inspections. So if you test a product to make sure it complies with whatever, that's not an audit. that's a quality control type of activity. And that's why, before talking about audits, that's why I went through what is a quality system and what are the different type of quality and regulatory folks and what their roles are. Because when you do quality audits, if you don't understand these basics, then FDA will gig you on not doing audits properly. So again, an audit is a quality assurance tool to prevent quality system errors or defects against internal and external requirements and standards. That's the key. So when you find these problems when you do your audit, then it goes to the quality assurance regulatory compliance group. Then they decide where are these serious in nature. So then we have to put these problems into a system called CAPA, which is correction and prevent. So because it's serious in nature, then each of those require a mini project, which are a CAPA. So I'm not going to go into CAPAs right now. That's a different type of training. But again, when you do your audits, you have to know all these different type of areas. So again, the purpose of a quality audit is not only because FDA or EU or Health Canada said so, but also to provide information to top management so that because they have the duty, money, responsibility, authority to make changes, not only with people, but processes, equipment, etc., so that they can go ahead and get these problems fixed. A lot of cases, they're outside type of sources that can help, like consultants, if companies don't have the resources. So one of the purposes of quality audit is to share that information with management and medical devices. That includes the management representative. He or she is the liaison with quality and regulatory and top management. So they usually know if you do have a proper quality system or not. And they know with these quality audits as far as do we need to stop everything right now, or everything's fine and dandy. So that's the key of an audit. It's not just because FDA says so, it actually helps and improves quality systems. So again, there's different types of audits. There's a routine audit. There's performance audits, compliance audits, desk audits, and follow-up audits. And it depends on the type of audit. Usually these different type of audits are ones that the head of quality assurance or regulatory compliance comes up with. Usually the manager has these scheduled, and depending upon the scope, can do one or more of these different types of audits throughout the year. So with these audits, there's three types. There's an internal audit and an external audit. The external audit is into two subparts, a supplier audit and a third-party audit. So the internal audit is one where either somebody from quality or regulatory does an audit of, let's say, the whole quality system or design controls or the CAPA system, or one that is for product X, or from the receipt to the finished product side, looking at a certain process or product. So there's different type of audits that go into here for internal audits. But again, every company does it differently. But the whole quality system has to be looked at annually. So you can have it as a full quality system. You can have the internal audit be done in parts because of, say, certain problems or whatever. You can have process audits or system audits or whatever the case is. You're also required to go ahead and do external audits, and these audits really are on the FDA side, let's just say, are second-party audits, which actually are audits that you do for your supplier. So under purchasing controls, which is 21 CFR 820.50, for purchasing controls, you have to evaluate your suppliers, contractors, and consultants. So one of the ways to do that is to audit them. The third-party audit is usually done by the external auditors, like an FDA investigator or an EU notified body person. But you can also do those internally, not as an internal audit, but as an external audit, like a mock FDA audit. In some cases, some companies actually use people like myself, outside consultants, to come in and do a mock FDA audit, just like FDA does, so that the folks can be prepared when FDA walks in the door. It's usually before the first inspection by FDA, or on the other side, just as a refresher when FDA comes in, or after FDA comes in as a check to make sure that the various checks are done properly after you have an FDA inspection. So again, there are differences between the two types. The internal audit is usually performed by, again, all these are qualified folks. You have to be trained in these areas. So it's by qualified internal auditors or contractors, consultants, to measure how good or bad a company's procedures are against external requirements, like FDA, EU, etc. The external audit, again, two parts there, is the supplier audit, which is basically looking at the supplier of product or a contractor, outside contractor, consultant, to make sure that they are doing what you, that is the manufacturer, said that they're going to do. And then a third-party audit, which is, again, you know, an FDA audit or FDA inspection or investigation, or an EU audit. Now, usually don't use audit when it comes to FDA, and I'll explain that a little bit later. Those, plus also you can have, like I said, audits done by consultants or contractors like myself, come in and do mock audits or specialized type of audits, etc. So again, with this, there's two different types of auditing styles. It's a vertical auditing and horizontal auditing. And usually the vertical auditing is one that is internal, and it's really looking at a certain type of function or department, such as design controls, the CAPA system, or manufacturing, or it can even get into CNC machining for process X. So it could be very in-depth type of auditing, really deep down type of auditing, looking at one or more areas or departments or functions. So it's looking at all those different type of procedures that support that. So if you're looking at, say, what quality assurance or compliance does, you're looking at the CAPA system, documentation change control, management controls. If there are different type of systems which are computer controlled, you're looking at process validation and production process controls too. So it's those different type of activities that you're going to interlink together. That's why I said it's a vertical type of audit for internal. The external audits are horizontal in that you're looking at process from the beginning to end, and it may or may not go across different type of functions or departments. So it's a slightly different type of audit approach. So those type of audits are ones that are done, say, by FDA. And the other type, the internal audit, is one that's usually done by company. And the reason for that is by law, the company has to find those problems and make sure that they are corrected, per se, before FDA walks in the door. That's one of the reasons why we do internal audits. So internal audits are more in-depth type of audits than the FDA type of inspection. So again, the internal audit, like I said, it requires the okay from top management because you're going to be talking to various folks, quality and regulatory, manufacturing, design folks. Again, you could be doing those while they're doing other activities like designing, manufacturing, and other type of activities. So we want to make sure that those managers are aware that audits are very important, that they have to be done, that if there are problems, then senior management has to then go ahead and talk to those managers and those employees that, say, George or whoever's going to come in and audit them. So with that, usually have a plan with scope saying this is what we're going to do, this is how long it should be done. Usually get the folks together, have a meeting, an opening meeting that explains what you're going to cover. So again, you have to be certified. Different companies do it different ways. You can actually go ahead and get different type of certifications, like as a biomedical auditor, or you can have folks like myself who are ex-FDA investigators, or whatever the case is. So whatever type of criteria companies have, usually for their lead auditors, then you have other type of auditors that kind of go under them. They're not the lead auditor, they're secondary, but until they become the lead auditor, usually those audits aren't done by themselves, but by a team approach. So it depends on each company as far as how you want to, train and certify these different type of auditors. Again, it doesn't matter, first, second, third party type of audits, these can be done. So you basically have an audit team with, one auditor or more, depends on the scope of the audit. Put together a team or just one person, going to have a plan which says this is what we're going to do. It's going to match up with an audit schedule. Then you may or may not, depends on your procedure, have a checklist. Then you're going to follow whatever your procedure says. You're going to write your report. You usually have a closing meeting. I mentioned the opening meeting, so you can have a closing meeting once it's all done. There may be some, miscommunications or problems or records or procedures that these folks are working on. So you include that, you update your report, and then you issue that out to the various departments. Also, the quality assurance regulatory compliance managers with the auditor's assistants looks over and says, these major type of activities, therefore we need to issue a CAPA or something like that. So again, that depends upon the company, and they define what those are. Same thing with the audit frequency, that is, how long you do these audits and what type of audit it is. As I mentioned, there's all different types. There's, a process, system, department, function, etc. audit. Some of these could be together like a FDA audit per QC, quality system inspection technique, or can have your own different type of audit approach. All those have to be specified in an audit procedure with proper forms, how to document all that. One of the key issues with these is you can't audit what you're doing. So folks in quality and regulatory, you can't audit the audit procedure, because that's what you do. So you have to have someone from the outside, maybe somebody in manufacturing or design or sales, whatever, be trained and then audit the internal audit practice. Again, with that, it's proper skills. Not everybody is an auditor, or should I say a good auditor. So you have to listen, you have to take notes, you have to basically know the laws and regulations and standards and internal procedures while you're doing these. Again, it's not anything that could be taught. I just can't give you a book and say, here you go, boom, you're an auditor. It's through many years of experience. You have to think inside and out of the box, because it's basically a risk type of activity. So you have to think, well, what they're doing, is that something that is good practice versus it's something that is a deviation from, say, an FDA law or regulation or an internal type of activity. So again, the key with that is, these auditors are not police. They're basically ones who ensure, is the company's quality system appropriate per the FDA laws and regulations. So again, it's not something that is personal per se. So that's kind of some type of culture that top management then has to explain to everybody else the reason for these audits. So with this, want to make sure that these are done timely and effective. What timely and effective are, that's up to each company. As I stated, these audits of the whole quality system by law have to be done at least annually. You want to make sure that there's a statistical scheme to these as far as risk, because a lot of these problems per se may escalate if they're not fixed. FDA will also gig you on, if they find a problem and they know that you have to do internal audits, say for medical devices per se, and it's not caught, well, what they'll do is they'll gig the company, and we didn't audit it properly. So the audit practice is non-conforming because FDA caught it and the internal audit didn't. So again, with this, I stated that not all of these problems you have to issue CAPAs. These could be corrected internally. It's up to the company as far as, if they want to issue a CAPA. But again, it's by risk. So I'm not going to cover all of what a CAPA is, correction, action, preventive action. That's another training session. But just wanted to give you a key that auditing and CAPAs are tied together with management controls, management reviews. So as I said, there's usually an opening meeting, usually with department managers and these different type of auditees, say from, if you're looking at design controls, it's usually the design development engineers and the managers. You're looking at the SOPs for design controls, and you're picking one or two design history files to audit. Then when you're done doing that, you're going to have a closeout meeting. Sometimes if it's a lengthy type of audit, you may have a daily wrap-up or say, well, this is what I found during this day, to give them a chance to go ahead and correct whatever those are before the final audit report comes out. So again, there could be, different type of problems here. The auditor or auditee, they may not have enough time, or they may be busy doing something else, or they may be intimidated. So again, these different type of concerns, conflicts, etc., that the auditor may have, he or she has to bring that to his manager, usually regulatory compliance, quality assurance manager, who then, will talk to the manager of those departments to go ahead and get those problems resolved. Again, it depends upon the company. Usually a lot of these top management kind of, understands what the purpose of these audits are. The second party audit is a little problematic because under purchasing controls, there's two different types. There's a finished medical device product and a product that's not yet finished. So if you remember earlier when I talked about quality control, that they actually test three different types. They receive product, an in-process product, and a finished product. That's the same thing for the suppliers and contractors, consultants, that they are involved with received products, in-process products, or finished products. So your received product is their finished product. So if that product is indeed a finished medical device product, then not only do they have to conform with your requirements, they have to conform with FDA and EU and Health Canada and Brazil and whatever else type of requirements you place upon them too. And so they are inspected and audited by FDA, notified body, Health Canada, etc., just like you are. The other side, if it's a received goods or a in-process, such as a sub-assembly, or if they sterilize a product, it's not yet a finished medical device product, then those per se are not regulated by the FDA. Those are not finished medical device products. A finished medical device product by FDA is a product that can be used as is, i.e., per what's in the 510K or the PMA, minus packaging, labeling, and sterilization. So if you don't have that, then it's up to each company to figure out what type of requirement these suppliers, contractors, consultants have to meet. Sometimes it says, well, even though you are not a finished device manufacturer or contractor, we want you to meet Part 820, or these parts of Part 820. So that could be an internal type of requirement that the company has. So again, these audits are the same thing like the internal audits. They're all risk-based. In this case, purchasing controls comes into place with that. So if the audit is bad, then it has to go to the company's purchasing group to say, well, do we need to keep this approved supplier, contractor, or consultant, or should we disapprove them and get somebody else as a result of these audits? Again, this is very difficult because business decisions come into place too. And I'm not talking about purchasing controls here. That's a other type of training, but there's a lot that gets into these audits and purchasing controls too. So I'm just covering the basics here. The third party audit, again, is one that's done by FDA or another regulated body like a notified body or registrar. Again, it's to see, are you complying or conforming to some type of external law, requirement, regulation, etc. And again, it can also be ones we're using, internal folks or external folks like myself, consultants, contractors come in and doing mock audits like them. So that's what a third-party audit is. It's not necessarily an audit by FDA. So when I talk about these audits, I'm going to look at two. I'm going to look at FDA audit and the EU notified body or registrar audit. Again, international, there's all different types. So EU is the most pronounced one for international. So we're going to use them just as a similarity and difference with FDA. So FDA is U.S. notified body or registrar. is international. And I'm just using the EU as just an example. So FDA, they're either announced or unannounced. So you can have a routine GMP inspection, a compliance inspection, a for cause inspection, investigation, or sample collection. These routine GMP inspections are right now per QSIC, quality system inspection technique. Compliance inspection is if FDA came in and found very serious things in nature, the company received a warning letter, not by the FDA investigator, but by the compliance department, then they're going to come in and look at those. For cause inspection is where there's a problem. Maybe FDA received a call from a consumer or a whistleblower, there's a lawsuit, or there's a lot of MDRs or recalls or whatever, then FDA comes in and figures out what's going on there. The investigation is not inspection. It's where FDA uses their police hats, not really guns per se, but being one that they're actually digging down to figure out what is the root cause of problem X. Like, well, the company hasn't, had a lot of recalls. Now all of a sudden they're submitting 15 recalls in 5 months. What the heck's going on here? So FDA can come and visit and do that. In some cases, FDA collects samples, usually not for medical device products, but usually for pharmaceutical products or biologics or food products or cosmetics. Not typical for medical devices. Notified bodies or registrars, they come in and do certifications. Again, for the EU, there's two types. There's a quality system certification and product certification. And again, these audits, not inspections or investigations, those are done annually, and there's certifications with those. So what you do before the audit is very important. You're going to have a plan. Make sure that everybody knows when FDA or the notified body comes in, including the receptionist. So you have procedures in place. Make sure everybody jives. And here's some keys here about plan for an FDA inspection. So you can read them on your free time. Excuse me. So again, make sure everybody is prepared. Sometimes they're unannounced. Sometimes they're announced. So, have practice procedures in place, like FDA is going to show up now. So that's why these mock audits and these internal audits are very important, because it basically gets people used to the FDA or the notified body when they come in. When these occur, again, same thing. You have a plan. Don't keep them waiting, because there could be misunderstandings. And one of the misunderstandings that FDA thinks about all the time is, are you falsifying records or creating records because you didn't have them? And the other one is having a room in the back to make sure everything's planned. And by doing that is having mock audits. So when you have a mock audit, you work out all the bugs and the problems before FDA or the notified body comes in. On the FDA side, they're going to take copies of paperwork. So therefore, you want to mark things that are indeed confidential, because if not, FDA will then figure out what is confidential and what is not. So don't mark some things that are not confidential as confidential, like labeling and other stuff, because it's not. It's stuff that you sell. So again, you should have somebody that takes notes. there usually should be, some type of system from the front room, the back room. The front room is basically where the FDA person is. The back room is basically the folks, say, typically quality assurance, regulatory compliance folks that are making sure that the people are trained properly. This is how to act and what to say in front of FDA or the notified body. These are all the records that FDA and the notified body are asking for, etc. So that's what the back room does. So there should be, some type of electronic type of method where the scribe in the front and the scribe in the back or communication. So again, you do not want to lie or falsify documents. If you do for FDA, it doesn't become a routine inspection, but then a criminal inspection and not the regular old FDA person, but actually a criminal investigator or group comes in and they can seize all your computers, all your paperwork, etc. And on the U.S. side, basically, let's just say, if people are conspiring against FDA, like falsifying information or supplying falsified documents to the FDA investigator, then they have an inkling and the criminal group comes in. Let's just say those folks will have a fun time making license plates, i.e. in jail. So one of the things that you want to do is basically, if the FDA does state, or the notified body does state, well, here's some problems, correct those and supply those corrections to them. Again, don't just do this willy-nilly. Make sure management, gives the okay for those corrections. Afterwards, I'm going to have a debriefing. How did we do? What do we need to fix? And if FDA or the notified body does supply you with an audit report with findings, please reply back in English with a plan. You don't have to get these things done within 15 days, but at least have some type of action plan. This is what we're going to do. So again, with this, have these mock audits done. Make sure everybody is familiar with FDA. There's going to be different type of things going on. There's going to be tours. FDA or notified body may defer from what they're supposed to do. So FDA right now uses QSIC, quality system inspection technique, which looks at areas. Management controls, design controls, CAPA system, production process controls. Those are the 4 orders that they go through, but they may skip those, they may do design controls and CAPA system and management controls or whatever the case is. So you have to be prepared for those different type of changes. Again, these readinesses are things like mock audits, have more internal audits, making sure everybody's trained, have a team together, make sure regulatory compliance and quality assurance folks are not only the police, but also the coaches before, during, and after FDA inspections, investigations, and international audits. So yes, there's a difference between the FDA and the EU. FDA is law enforcement, EU is precision compliance. What do I mean by that? Basically, FDA's job is to prevent adulterated and misbranded products, i.e. non-conforming bad products, from entering the U.S. marketplace. Compliance means you comply to the laws, regulations. Whatever that says, you do. Boom. There's no maybe, what if, I don't know. If it says to do it, you do it. EU is assuring capability of providing precision, so a quality management system is in place so the products can be marketed in the EU with the CE mark. So these traditionally are the 3 medical device directives, but really changing right now into a EU regulation. So depends on FDA or EU, doesn't matter which one they're going to come in. Again, there's different type of approaches. Usually with FDA, it's government people, it's consumer safety officers or investigators. Or you're going to have third-party folks like state or notified body or someone like that. The FDA gives a blessing that says, yes, you can be us. So they come in and act like FDA through these different type of third-party programs. On the EU side, there's usually not folks from the European Union, but these outside industry folks called notified bodies or registrars that come in. Notified body, basically, they're accredited to do not only the audit part, but also they give the approval for product and process. They issue certifications, whereas someone that's a registrar doesn't do that. Here it just says, yes, you do or you don't meet EU or ISO 1545 or whatever the case is. Again, there's different approaches to them. Like I said, FDA uses the QSIT booklet when they do routine type of inspections. So again, there's two parts. Usually, I mentioned the civil part. Don't want the criminal part, but that can be done. Again, usually when on the U.S. side, foreign side, when FDA comes in, they show credentials. On the U.S. side, they issue a notice of inspection, is FDA 42 form, to the most responsible person on site. So if the president or vice president or whoever is not on site, the firm is in operation, whoever's the most responsible at that time gets that. So you can't say, well, sorry, so-and-so is gone. Nope. Because if you do that, then FDA will come back with a nasty inspection warrant and a very nasty police person with a gun. And if that's done, then, well, let's just say you go to jail if you defy the inspection warrant. So you don't want that to occur. So basically, this isn't anything against Company X. They're just saying, are you complying with the FDA laws and regulations? So it's nothing personal. If they do find problems, usually major problems, they're going to issue it in a ticket called a report of projectural findings, or FDA 43. For foreign firms, it's all findings. For U.S. firms, it's major findings. And again, with medical devices, it's usually done by categories: design controls, management controls, CAPA system, production process controls, etc. Again, as I mentioned, EU doesn't visit. They have these outside industry groups, notified bodies, and registrars come in. FDA inspections, investigations, audits, sample collections, whatever, are free. On the EU side, they're not. You have to pay for those. But, nevertheless, on both of them, the philosophies are slightly different. You still have to comply, conform to the appropriate laws, regulations, directives, etc. So I put a chart here, which you can read on your own time, that talks about the similarities and difference between FDA and EU audits. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here. You can try to read those on your own. Right now, there's a pilot program called MedSAP, which is Medical Device Single Audit Program. It's one that became official earlier this year, and right now Canada is putting it in place. So instead of doing audits per the Canadian regulations, Canada's going to require the single audit program, MedSAP. So I'm just going to very quickly touch base on it. FDA, Australia, Brazil, Health Canada, as I mentioned, Japan are the ones right now that are participating in it. Observers are the EU and WHO, and EU may go into it. Right now they're not, but stay tuned. So again, what this is it's looking at ISO 1345. That's the international requirement similar to FDA's, which is 21 CFR 820, which is basically the GMPs for medical devices. So it's looking at that and then taking the laws and regulations for each of these various areas. So again, I mentioned Australia is one. So if you have product that's in Australia, boom, they're going to cover the Australian regs. Same thing for Brazil, same thing for Canada, and the FDA, and Japan. So again, just touched upon that very briefly. So when FDA walks in the door, they're going to ask, let's see the most responsible person. If it's in the U.S., they're going to issue 42 to that person and show credentials. If it's a foreign firm, just show credentials. There may be more than one person. They may be having more than one investigator. Maybe it's a training exercise. Bring a new investigator out. Maybe the person isn't familiar with, say, laboratory areas, so they may bring an analyst out. There may be headquarters folks like reviewers, ones for 15Ks or PMAs, and also have state or folks too. So in certain states like Colorado and California, they do have state FDA folks that do cover medical device areas. So it may be a joint inspection between federal and state. Folks embargo power, so they may bring them along too. Again, be very truthful. If you lie or give false information by word or by paper or electronically to the FDA, you are not committing a 21 CFR charge. You're committing a charge against a federal official, which is under Party 18. And if you do that, let's just say your next career will be in a wonderful jail making license plates. And that's because it'll hop from a civil to a criminal very quickly. Again, the other part is a criminal investigation. So you don't want that done. I want to go back here where it says district office. Right now, FDA is transitioning. There are no district offices or central offices, but they're putting it into groups by geography. So say for like myself, I was a FDA person in Detroit District, which is the states of Michigan, Indiana. I was the medical device person in the South Bend, Indiana resident post. So that meant that my travel area was basically the northern part of Indiana. But I did help, other parts of Indiana and Michigan, those offices, and also Cincinnati District and Illinois, or Chicago District, excuse me, just because they were close. But since FDA is getting rid of the district offices and the regional offices, the FDA investigators now, the travel area is much bigger. So you can have, say, an FDA investigator, let's say, present like myself, so I'm still in FDA in South Bend. I could travel to, say, a firm in Boston or a firm in Florida and do a medical device inspection there. So again, don't be comfortable with, well, here's the FDA person. It may not be that same person now. So again, when the FDA comes in, they're going to tell you the visit, maybe. If it's an investigation, not. They may pretend this could be a routine inspection, like doing perquisite, but you can kind of tell once you've gone through these for a while that it's really an investigation, not an inspection. They don't really tell you what they're doing. They may be dumb as a fox, or ask loaded questions, or ask the wrong questions to see if you know what you're doing. Again, it can turn into an investigation of situations violative. They may collect samples. They may have product seizures and different type of investigations, as I mentioned. So again, here's the typical forms. This is what a 42 looks like. Here's what a 43 looks like, and it's like a traffic ticket testing. Again, with medical devices, there's a statement there. There's basically two parts. Part one is this. It says that these are not objective or exhaustive lists, of objective conditions under the law. Your firm is responsible for conducting internal self-audits to identify and correct any and all violations of the GMP. So if you remember when I talked about that earlier, when I talked about auditing, that's why the internal audit is a much deeper dive than the FDA audit, because FDA requires you under the medical device GMPs 820.22, which talks about internal auditing, to audit. And if you find problems, then to correct those. And if FDA finds it and you don't, they're going to gig you. So here's some examples of what else goes into the 43. So this document list of observations made by the FDA representatives during inspection of the facility. Their inspection observations do not represent a final agency determination regarding your compliance. Why that is important is because the FDA investigator is not like the EU notified body person. He or she is not a compliance officer. So therefore, they cannot state, are you good or bad, like the EU person does. They're like a cop. Here it is. Someone else is then the judge, i.e. the compliance person. So continue on. If you have an objection regarding an observation or have implemented or plan to implement corrective action in response to the observation, you may discuss that with the FDA representative during the inspection, or submit this information to FDA at address above. Again, going back, that's the address all the way here at the top, where in this case it's district office, but it's not district office right now. Instead, FDA is reorganizing. So again, you give FDA the chance to go ahead and see those corrections of whatever objections they have. Or if not, you come up with a plan, like I stated earlier, 15 days after you receive the 43. If FDA does collect samples, they're going to issue a 44 form called receipt for samples. And this is what that looks like. Again, FDA is going to look at, are you complying with the various laws? So I mentioned a couple there, 803, 806, 828, 821. They're also going to see who has the duty, responsibility, authority, and power. That's because of some different court cases past, the Party case and others, where it said that the president and top management is responsible, even though they're not officially at the site. So they're going to ask, what do you do? What's your title? Look at training records, that type of stuff. Because if there are problems, and they know who to issue these paperworks to. not just the 43, but warning letters and other type of things. They're also, unlike the state, they have to make sure that something crosses state lines. So for medical devices, it's either a raw material component outside of the state. So for example, I'm in Indiana, so outside of the state of Indiana, or you have a customer outside of the state of Indiana. So they have to prove that. If not, if you don't have that interstate jurisdiction by either the component or raw material or customer, therefore it's not a federal type of action, it's a state action, then FDA will not inspect the company. But with medical devices, it's presumed through the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act that there is interstate jurisdiction for medical device products. So medical device products, unlike foods or cosmetics, etc., or certain drugs, are not just regulated by the state. So medical devices are always investigated, inspected by FDA in the U.S. So again, they're going to see, are you conforming with these laws? They're going to issue the 42 U.S. firms, 43 for all firms, foreign and domestic. They may or may not, usually don't collect physical samples of medical device products, but if they do, they can issue a 44 form. So again, they're going to look at interstate jurisdiction, they're going to collect that paperwork, invoices, purchase orders. They're going to collect, if you do have quality manual, that, training records, SOPs, fill out forms, etc. Again, if they're doing inspections, inspection, like I said, is not investigation. So inspection is basically one that you're complying with 820, 803, 806, and they're doing an audit per, let's say, QSIP book, like Quality System Inspection Technique. Investigation is one that doing just like it sounds. They're figuring out what is the problem here. So they're not going to issue a 42. Usually there are some cases that they do, but usually they don't. So they're going to show their credentials and look at certain areas. So they're going to touch base on recalls, complaints. There may be situations where there's some type of disaster, earthquake, or flood, or whatever. We're going to come in and see, how the company's doing with that. They may be doing, police type of work, like undercover buys or those type of things, seize products and that type of stuff. So it's different type of acts they do when they go ahead and do investigations versus inspections. EU, on the other side, they're determining conformance against these standards. Again, those are changing from the 3 medical device directives to the medical device regulation. There's a reason for that. I'm not going to get into those reasons right now. That's another course. But basically, those will be changing. So if you're involved with Europe, you have to get involved with changing relatives to this regulation. Also, ISO 1345, again, is the industry standard for GMPs, similar to 820. That's changing to comply with this EU. They may or may not collect product samples, because remember I mentioned there's have certifications, give the CE marks for products. They also do the same thing for quality systems research. So again, when FDA comes in, they're going to cover those things, compliance regarding these laws and regs, see who has the duty, power, responsibility. That is to issue the paperwork to who, and make sure there's some type of interstate. And right now, it's per QSIT. Turbo EIR is an activity that FDA uses internally, so it's being changed right now. We're not calling it Turbo EIR. I can't remember right offhand what it's called, But basically what it is FDA is going to bring a computer in with a printer and type in the information on the 43, and a lot of this is canned. So they find the deviation, and underneath it, they go ahead and put the information specifically down for the example that they're looking at. Then when they're done, they're going to ask you about annotation. So what that is have these things been corrected, or are you going to correct those in a certain time frame, or not reply right now? That's at the end of the FDA inspection. And then afterwards, there's 3 different types of classifications, NAI, VAI, and OAI. If it's an NAI or VAI type of situation, then they're going to supply you with a letter and the report, an EIR, Establishment Inspection Report. The investigator's not going to do that, but the compliance group is going to do that. Again, it's per QSIT. I listed some information here regarding that. I'm just going to just briefly touch about QSIT. So as I mentioned, there's 4 major areas: management controls, design controls, CAPA, system reduction. It's also going to cover the other 4, which is documentation change controls, facility controls, equipment controls, material controls, while they're covering the other 4 major ones. So again, this is what it looks like just very briefly. You start and stop with management controls. So it's a top-down type of activity. They're going to look at procedures. They're going to sample records. They're going to look at some examples that you following that. So they're going to ask people questions or observe. So again, they're going to sample, probably sampling tables. And if you're okay, great. If not, then they're going to give you on a sale for quality system. So again, as I mentioned earlier when I talked about regulatory affairs and with the classification devices, why that's important is FDA is going to sample these per the QSIT program, depends on what type of device it is. So if you are a company that only manufactures Class 1 or Class 2 devices, then they can use this QSIT sampling table. So what they're going to do is ask you how many records of, let's pick complaints, for example. How many complaints have you had from December 2015 to December 2017? They usually pick a 2-year time frame by law. So you say, oh, I have 300 complaints. So since that is over 30 total, they're going to use the sampling table. If it's 30 or less, they're going to look at all of those complaints for that 2-year time period. So if it's over 30, they can pick from in between 11 to 157 of those 300 records. So what that chart means is if they look at, let's say, 11 as an example. So that's 0 out of in Part A. So if they look at 11 out of the 300 records, and those records are fine, they don't find any problem, that means that there's 95% assurance that 30%, that's for the 0.30 UCL, means upper confidence level, that 30 of those records, or 30% of those records are bad. So basically, with that, so it's 300 times 0.3, which is 90. So that's the amount of records that could be bad. Doesn't mean that they are bad. So that's how this the sampling table works. If they look at those 11 records and 1 or more are bad, and they can't use this confidence level here. And it's the same thing here, similar table here for class 2, class 3 licensing, license devices, so 15 to 190. So you want to make sure, please FDA, so they, choose these lower numbers, 11 and 15, for 7 190. So that's where these mock audits and all this come into place. So make sure prepared. So again, they're going to ask for these records. They're going to sample them. They may or may not tell you the rows and that. Every investigator is different. They may say, give me a log, and they pick them. Or they may have you pick them. It depends. So again, it's a approach here that they're looking at procedures and they're sampling records here. They're not, going to deep dive unless there is a problem. And they may, turn the 11 records to 157 records if there is a systematic problem. Again, it's a top-down approach, looking at the quality manual, quality procedures, SOPs, work instructions, records. And then if they do have problems, you're going to work backwards. So that's basically what QSIT is. There are two types here. There's abbreviated QSIT, which is CAPA +1. Again, it's the other three major areas: management controls, design controls, production process controls, U.S. firms only. Comprehensive QSIT, which are all four of those, really all 8 of those. Management controls, design controls, CAPA, and production process controls. Those are done for every foreign inspection. So foreign firms don't have the luxury like U.S. firms where they can hop back and forth from the abbreviated QSIT to the comprehensive QSIT. Follow-up inspections, again, 2 parts. There's the compliance inspection, and that's one that's basically done because you've got a warning letter or something like that, an injunction. So they're following up on those deviations. A for cause inspection, again, is one. No risk-based inspection. Those are ones that are done because of a certain problem or area. So maybe CDRH, when they're looking at, let's say, a 510K or PMA, they want an investigator to go out and cover a certain area, let's say design controls. That's a for cause inspection. Or case is that there has been a lot of recalls or MDRs, but all of a sudden the company supplies a whole bunch of those to the FDA. Therefore, the investigator will go out and do a special type of audit that looks at those and says, okay, what the heck's going on? Why were you okay? Then all of a sudden, boom, you reported all these CAPA system type of things to us. So again, these are the major areas here that FDA looks at. So I'm just very briefly listing those. You can read all those on your own. So these are the different questions that are going to ask per QSIT. So these are the ones that are going to ask for management controls, for design controls, for the CAPA system, and for production process controls. So again, not only for the QSIT booklet, but they're going to follow these compliance programs. And then this is the 3 basic ones there. There's the IOM, that's our internal procedures, and of course the Code of Federal Regulations, CFR, and I mentioned their examples there, 820, 803, 806, 821s for a certain type of devices, not usually. Again, these different labels, 1 is abbreviated, 2 is all 4, 3 is the compliance or for cause. And again, there's different types there. So these different codes and that are internal for FDA. Companies don't have to worry about that. But if you want to read more about that, there's compliance audit, compliance program information. So the audit findings are basically what FDA gives you on. So some are verbal, some are written. depends on what they are. So again, some of these, FDA can put on the 43 form. Some they have to get prior approval, like the pre-market notification ones. They have to get CDRH approval for that. Again, for foreign firms, everything goes on the 43 except for those administrative things like registration and listing and citing PMA stuff. But on the U.S. side, it's only major type of deviations, except for those administrative ones that go on the 43. So when FDA comes in, like I said, every 2 years, I mentioned that example earlier, 2-year time frame for complaints. That's because it's under law. So if FDA comes in, it can come in once every 2 years. Therefore, you have to maintain these records for at least a 2-year time frame. So that's why I mentioned that. Again, depends on the different type of problems or where you're located as far as what type of audit they're going to do. Usually, it goes back and forth from level 1 to level 2. For U.S. firms, foreign firms, it's always level 2. So again, for the abbreviated one, it's capital +1, alternate. For the level 2, it's basically all of those. We're going to cover all 4 major ones, but they're going to tie into the other areas with the different questions and forms and SOPs that we're going to look at. So we're going to touch base to all of them per QSIT. But QSIT may be changing. They may update that or may go into that MedSep type of program like Canada has. So that's why I covered that very briefly earlier on, because things may be changing on the FDA side too. Again, here's the compliance type of inspection and the for cause type of inspection. So I covered those, very, very briefly to give you a view of the different type of inspections and investigations the FDA covers. So when they actually issue a 43, you'll know if it's OAI, official action indicated, that is warning letter above or not. And basically what it is if it's a situation 1 versus a situation 2 type of activity. So it's done by risk. Situation 1 are ones that are a repeat from the prior. A total or major failure of one of these QSIT type of areas or quality system areas. Ones that the product doesn't comply with your specifications, or it's like I said, a repeat from the last time. Situation 2 is everything else. As I also mentioned, that there's these third-party programs where instead of FDA, you can have states or local or these notified body folks or whoever come in and do the inspection like FDA. So right now there's these different pilot programs, including this MedSep program that FDA has. So again, you can look at these different type of information that I have in these slides a little bit more detail. So again, when FDA comes in, they issue the 42, they do the inspection. It may take 5 days or more, depends on what they're finding. For foreign firms, it's usually a 4-day type of inspection per the QSIT. 5 or so days or more on the U.S. side, it depends what they find. They may bring, additional investigators in, but when they're all done, they're going to issue the 43, again, which is risk-based. They can put major ones for U.S. sites, and they're going to put all of them for foreign sites. They discuss them, they're going to annotate them. Again, apologize, it's not called Turbo AR, they just changed, I forgot the name of what their computerized system is, but they're going to annotate those, reported correct, not verified, correct, verified, promise to correct, and under consideration. After they leave, if you get a 43, you submit a letter to them within 15 days. How you're going to correct it. Again, you don't have to correct them within 15 days, but have a plan. Provide all documentation if you're a foreign company in English. If it's not in English, sorry, go back. And have a timetable as far as date. You want to watch out there, corrections versus corrective action. So if FDA gives an example, say, we looked at 11 out of 300 complaint records, and here's what we found, example, blah, 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 and you only have corrected those 3 or 4 that they listed on the 43 point, sorry, that doesn't count. You have to not only do the correction, but corrective action, preventive action, let's say in this case, the complaint handling system. So they're not only looking at corrections, but corrective actions. Doesn't necessarily mean a CAPA per se, but usually 43s and EU and other international bodies, when they give their reports, or 43s for FDA, usually companies issue CAPAs as a result of those and supply those CAPAs to these FDA or the notified body. So again, on the U.S. side, the investigator is not the judge, he's the police. So this paperwork goes to a compliance officer. Again, right now it's district, but it's going to be changing. They're going to be getting rid of districts, but going into these different type of zones, 1, 2, 3. So you may not have district compliance officers, but you may have, a zone 1, which is say a compliance officer for medical devices. Zone 2 is a compliance officer for foods, whatever. So I don't know what those zones now that are. FDA is still figuring that stuff out. Again, if it's OAI versus VAI, that definitely goes to CDRH. And those will definitely be ones where it's a warning letter above. So I'm going to explain a little bit what VAI, OAI, and NEI are. NEI is no action indicated. That's where FDA does not find any objections or minor objections which are not on a 43 form. VAI is voluntary action indicated, where they did find objections, but they're not serious in nature. So if you remember earlier when I talked about situation 1 and situation 2 for medical devices, it's situation 2 deficiency. OAI is very serious nature deficiencies, where FDA is going to take adverse action against a warning letter at least. So it's at least one situation 1 type of activity. So these VAIs can turn into OAIs if it's a repeat. So if you say that we're going to do this, whatever it is, blah, 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 FDA comes in and checks on that and you didn't do it, they're going to say, failure to follow or whatever the case is, and state it's a repeat. Once it's a repeat, boom, it's automatically an OAI type of issue, even if it's a situation 2 type of activity. So again, once the FDA investigator gives the 43 form, they close the inspection, then they go back to their office and write the report. So again, the inspection is not done, closed, until the firm receives the report. If it's basically open, that it's going to the compliance group or compliance officer, and he or she is making the decision. So these are different decisions the compliance officer can make. You have a warning letter, product seizure, injunction, an import alert for foreign firms, and criminal prosecution. Some of these activities are civil, some are criminal, which means you need extra court to go ahead and do those. Another example is for medical devices, and that's mandated recall. That's under 21 CFR 810. So again, as I stated, you have civil and criminal type of actions. Ones may or may not need a court of law. The criminal ones do. And if a court of law is it, it's not really FDA, but the Department of Justice is involved. So again, for these OAI type, it's a U.S. company. They basically give a warning letter. They may, have a compliance meeting with the company. You want to, go ahead when you receive a 43 to reply, so you won't get a warning letter. But if things are serious in nature, even if you do reply, you may get a warning letter. Depends on the compliance officer. Could seize product. It's very risky if you don't recall. To do that, or they can join, have a civil money penalty. Consent decree is basically very similar in nature. The difference is the civil money penalty is one where not only are they charging the firm like they do with an injunction or consent decree, but they're actually charging the people involved. That's why earlier on I mentioned when FDA comes in, not only do they look seeing if you're complying with the actual laws in interstate commerce, they're also asking who is doing what, duties, responsibilities, authorities, because in these cases they can charge companies millions of dollars, civil money penalties and injunctions. Funky things going on. It hops from the civil side to the criminal side, and FDA criminal investigators come in, seize everything, boom, they find bad things on, like conspiracy, etc. Folks go to trial and can go to jail. For foreign firms, no such thing. You get a 43. If it's major, you get a warning letter. Or if it's very major, then you get an automated detention. Sorry, product doesn't go in the U.S. That's it. So can't do these other things like part seizures, arrest people, whatever. Foreign firms now, initial importers. Again, the warning letter is the judge's recommendation, i.e. the compliance officer, I should say. The 43 is the cop or the investigator issuing that ticket. So again, a warning letter is just that, a warning. It's the first warning from FDA saying, you did not comply with the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act and these regulations. You don't apply within 15 days, we're going to do other things. So you have to take the 43 and the warning letter very serious in nature. Not other things will occur. So again, first thing you submit these in English to the FDA. Remember, the corrections are not just the corrections, but corrective actions, preventive actions. So that's the key there. Again, if you need assistance, myself, and other consultants can help regarding that. I want to look at some statistics here. So again, here's some different websites here that talk about FDA quality and statistics. Basically for medical devices, these are the key ones, again, for QSIT, and for controls, production process control, CAPA system, and records in general. And they kind of flip back and forth, for each year. Same thing for non-QSIT type of inspections, these for cause, etc. So again, here they are for each year, just generally. Here they are by the different subsystems. And again, like I said, they flip back and forth, depending upon compliance or non-compliance by company. So usually, CAPA and design controls are the first two that are the major. Then documentation change control, management controls, and production process controls are lower, but that doesn't mean you have to ignore them. So here's examples of the different warning letters that were issued every year. Here's the different inspections that were done for each year. This is foreign and domestic. So you can look at some of these trends throughout the years and make your own conclusion. Basically, what it's saying is that even though companies may change per se, FDA is going to make sure that you comply with the law and regulations. So how FDA is going to do that in the future, don't know, because they're going to either get rid of and come up with either in the better version of QSIT or and use the MedSet program or some other means. What that is right now, I'm not sure. FDA is in the transition period, not only for medical device inspections, investigations, but organization too. So again, no more district offices or regional offices, but putting into these zones. Who's going to come and visit you the next time or the first time? Who knows? So again, stay tuned for all that. So right now, I put some references here as far as different type of areas for FDA for medical devices. So you can click on those and look at them. So again, just summary, concluding with this training. Quality starts from top management buy-in. These problems are really not the fault of any person or system per se, but by poor planning by top management. It's a system approach. So when you do audits, the person that you're speaking to, usually like say the production technician or the quality control person, you may find that following procedure or whatever. So you should explain, hey, it's not your fault. I'm taking it on you personally, but it's the fault of who? Top management. Top management with poor planning. Why? Because they use not the right goal. So if you remember earlier when I talked about those goals, it wasn't a quality system approach. So that meant that they didn't instruct the lower level managers to be managers to make sure that these folks are following these, understanding them and doing them. That's what establishment means. Have procedures, train people in these procedures. They're supposed to follow those procedures and document they've done those. If they don't, then they stop, go back to management, they issue a change order to have new or revised procedures, people can get trained on those, and then things occur. So that's what a quality system is. That's why you do audits. Again, do not falsify anything. Don't be unethical, because once you do, FDA knows this. Remember, they are not an auditor like the notified body. They are a trained police person. They may not carry a gun. So that's what they are, an investigator. They do investigations and inspections, just like the cop. So that's why I stated FDA inspection investigations versus audits. Yeah, they're doing audits, but they're really doing investigations and inspections. So again, have a game plan before they walk in the door, not just FDA, but the international folks. Some of these folks may be wearing different hats. You may have an EU person, notified body do that. Next time, he or she may be FDA. So, just because you see the same person doesn't mean he or she will be doing the same type of activity. Both EU and FDA activities are changing. So QSIT is going to be changing. As I mentioned, the medical device directives in 1345 are being revised. They're going into the medical device regulation, and 1345 is being updated to comply with that new regulation instead of the directives. Health Canada is changing their inspection approach to the MedSet program. You may buy into that. So again, these different type of activities here that I mentioned, right now may be changing in the future. So basically, all done. So if you have questions, please send myself an email, and I'd be happy to answer those for you. Thanks a lot, and hope to see you at a training session.